Hi, my name's Melissa Hobbs and I've been invited here by ActAsia to talk about compassionate fashion. And that's a term that asks us to consider animal welfare alongside the mix of other considerations, things like sustainability. And specifically today, I'm going to be talking about fur. But before we get started, I'd like to share a photo of myself pre-iPhones and pretty much a lot of the digital technology and certainly social media. I'm at a friend's black tie wedding, 2005, and the girls I'm with are also wearing fur, and we worked in fashion magazines at the time. The fur I'm wearing is my great-grandmother's Arctic fox, and I debated before the wedding whether or not it was appropriate that as a vegetarian that I should wear fur. I decided that I didn't eat meat, but as I wore leather, it was okay. And yet looking back on that day, I still remember feeling a sense of, I wouldn't say shame, but that it was wrong. It didn't feel right. And if I was to fast forward to today, to what I know now, I wouldn't be seen in that fur at all. And it turns out I'm not alone. If we fast forward, we find ourselves living in quite challenging times, and even pre-COVID, the fashion industry was under increasing pressure to reduce its global footprint. And we know why. It's one of the biggest polluters in the world. So I suppose with that, and back to that picture of me wearing fur, with this question of sustainability and this demand for sustainability comes the question of ethics. And that's challenging because ethics and sustainability haven't always been easy partners. What's sustainable isn't always ethical and vice versa. But that's changing and fast. So really the purpose of my talk today is to show you that this term compassionate fashion and this consideration of animal welfare as part of the mix in fashion is going to become increasingly important in the years ahead. So to do that, we're going to look at three key points. The first is this conscious generation, this consumer who is driving ethical fashion into the mainstream. The next point we're going to have a look at is how brands are responding. And finally, we're going to wrap up with really what is the future of artificial fur. So let's start with this new consumer, the woke consumer. So there's been a lot of press on the woke consumer in recent years, and in its broadest sense, it's really a term that acknowledges an awareness of social issues and a movement against injustice, inequality, and prejudice. So really, this trend is largely being driven by Gen Z and millennials. What we know about them is that this conscious generation will give their loyalty and preference to brands that are most likely aligned to their own beliefs and value systems. In terms of why it's such a big deal, it's just for many reasons, but one of the reasons is the sheer size of them. I've got some stats here up on the screen where you can see that 75% of the workforce in 2025 or by 2025 will be millennials. And currently, Gen Z make up 40% of global consumers. And I was quite surprised by how big those numbers are, but they're only going to continue to grow in the years ahead. So really then I suppose we think, well, what does this mean for brands? And it's quite a lot because really, when there's talk of COVID bringing about the biggest economic contraction since World War II, and there was a report put out by the McKinsey Institute recently that suggests that many global fashion brands within the next 12 to 18 months won't survive. And so for the ones that do, it's a whole new world. And it really is this resetting of business rules. Some of the things that I've read about and that we expect to see are things like the speed of the fashion cycle being reduced. And this ties into just this whole idea of landfill and fast fashion. And this new woke consumer simply will reject that because of the environmental impact. There's this idea which also ties into that of this circular fashion economy, and what that is where garments and clothes are being repurposed and being reused in different ways, so it's extending their life. And then there's going to be this shift, it's starting to happen, but the brands that really connect to this new consumer will be able to master the art of storytelling, and that storytelling will sit around their purpose, their values, their heritage, and their authenticity. So let's have a look at how brands are responding. And I suppose, what we can say in recent years is that there's been lots of global factors, a COVID aside, which is obviously huge and will have huge ramifications. But there was previously to that, there were bushfires raging across Australia, across the Amazon. There were the school strikes that were happening globally. And all of these things reinforce the idea that people are understanding that our relationship with the natural world is broken and they want it to be different. We'll have a look at fur first of all. And really, it would be fair to say that the fur movement has had great success in recent years. Over 1,100 fashion brands have signed an alliance or an agreement to say that they will be fur-free. And that's everything from some high street brands right through to luxury fashion houses like Armani and Prada and Gucci, Burberry. Which is great news. Fur's also been banned in a number of countries, and that's the sale and importation, and also factory farms themselves have been banned in a huge number of countries. But despite that, and this surprised me, is that fur remains a very large industry and a growing industry. And really on that, it's been largely driven out of China. China is responsible for 75% of the production of fur. And there's also this move away from, full fur jackets, for example, and instead we're seeing this trend with fur trim. And that's created another problem in the fur industry, which is this whole cat and dog fur industry. And I've got a great quote here, which before I put up, I just want to say that on that, to give you an idea of the size or the scale of that cat and dog fur, an ActAsia report found that in one market alone, some 19 to 21 million dog pelts are traded each year. So part of the problem with that is around labelling. And I'm just going to put this quote up from Pei, the founder of ActAsia, which says, "The growing trade in dog and cat fur is not just a byproduct of the meat industry. It is a standalone industry that is financially supported by consumers in the West who more often than not don't know what they're buying." And that brings up a really valid point in that the labelling of fur is problematic. There was a very recent example in Australia where faux fur or products or garments that were being labelled as faux fur were found to actually be made from dog or raccoon dog fur. There was also an incident overseas where 600 textiles of real fur were being sold in 10 fur-free alliance states. So, going back to what consumers are expecting and demanding in terms of transparency and better animal welfare, that is problematic. So if I move on to more broadly looking at what brands are doing, there's been many major fashion brands such as H&M and ASOS who have responded to these customer demands with animal welfare policies. But a report, a very, very significant report that was put together by the Global Animal Welfare Protection group or charity, 4 Paws, in conjunction with Good On You, did a very substantial piece. It's called Animal Welfare in Fashion 2020. And it found many things, but really in summary, what it found is that there's overwhelming research that consumers want greater transparency, that they care about the treatment of animals as part of the production process. And so there's a very big gap in that versus what fashion houses are saying they're doing and what they're actually doing. So let's have a look at a couple of the top line results that found that only 38% of fashion brands appear to consider animal welfare risks to some degree in their supply chain. Only a quarter of fashion brands have a formal animal welfare policy, and 1 in 5 use assurance schemes which prioritise animal welfare to trace at least some of the animal-derived materials, which goes back to that point again about what we were seeing happening in Australia. So really there's a big room for improvement there from a brand point of view, and moving forward for brands to connect in with this conscious consumer, things will need to change. But it's not all doom and gloom. I wanted to share some examples of initiatives and brands that are really doing it well. So look, when I was in LA last year, I was lucky enough to meet with Jonathan Ohio, who is the founder of FAKE, which stands for the Fashion for Animal Kingdom and Environment. So really what Jonathan saw was a gap in the market to connect sustainable vegan brands with this new woke consumer. And at the time, he was creating lots of pop-ups where designers could get face-to-face with consumers. Obviously with COVID, and for him, he's been very smart with the way he's gone about it. It's forced him online, but in a really fantastic way, because it's increased his ability to reach an audience beyond that local audience. So he does weekly pop-ups where people can chat to designers. There's a lot of transparency, there's a lot of conversation. And then on his site, he's got over 80 vegan sustainable brands. So there's this great opportunity for consumers who want or demand more to actually be able to access the sort of brands that are providing what they expect. Then I have to think about a local brand called Unreal Fur. So Unreal Fur launched in 2011. They've gained a cult following globally, and I was talking to Jack Tufty recently about their mission. So their mission is to end the use of real fur by producing or creating the most in vogue, beautiful faux fur products in the market. And really, their mission is also to create garments that people will hold on to and have in their wardrobe for a long time. But he also spoke about this circular activity. So what they're seeing is this online community that have actually, when they're finished with their fur after several seasons, they're actually then on-selling them before they go and buy their next one. And Jack was saying, like, quite literally, we couldn't be prouder of this because our garments are getting a new lease of life with another owner. And again, it's keeping this product in a life cycle, which is exciting. He gave me a great quote. It's quite long. I'm going to put it onto the screen, and feel free to read it. Really, what he's saying here is that although Unreal Fur are not saying, right, as of today, right now, what we're producing is 100% sustainable, what we know with the way technology is advancing is that it's very likely in the future that we will be producing a garment that is sustainable. So really what we're saying is, we're giving consumers a choice. They can choose something that's well on its way to being sustainable, that doesn't involve animal cruelty and the death of an animal. All consumers can choose that option. And it's probably fair to say that the fur industry is not offering this same progressive stance. And I'd have to agree with Jack, because the fur industry is an ugly business. It's estimated that over 100 million animals lose their lives in the industry each year. The overwhelming majority of them, it's about 85%, spend their lives on factory farms, and they live in very cruel, inhumane conditions. I've got some photos here up on the screen. That doesn't include the millions of animals that are caught by trappers using things like steel traps, bobcats, raccoons and the like. And it also doesn't include the cat and dog trade that I mentioned earlier. The thing is that all of these animals face horrific deaths. It's whether it's gassing, drowning, electrocution, because ultimately the end goal is to protect the quality of the fur. So no consideration is given to the treatment of the animal as part of that process. And, environmental issues or the issue of sustainability becomes another talking point here, because I do hear it often, which is, oh, but it's more sustainable and that there's issues with faux fur. And look, I think that that's not necessarily true. And in fact, Act Asia found that every year, and I've got it here again up on screen, thousands of gallons of toxic waste from fur production are released into the natural environment, polluting nature and killing wildlife. As mentioned earlier, China is the biggest producer, exporter and importer of fur in the world. There's no animal welfare laws in China, and so what that means is that fur producers can use very cheap methods with very poor welfare standards. And the reason they do that is that these low costs mean bigger profits. So really, where to from here? If I, just following on from that whole fur point, in terms of the artificial fur market, it's been projected to grow almost 20% between 2019 and 2023. So really, we've got to look at, okay, well, where's that growth going to come from? And really, it's going to be about technology. It's not going to be a cheap fix. Overall, even beyond fur, there was a report that came out and said that the fashion industry as a whole would need to be looking to be spending sort of around that $20 billion mark annually to actually transform the market. But consumers will have a lot of say in terms of where this money is spent, because what we know is that they care about sustainability, they care about the recycling, and they absolutely care about the ethics of where materials are being sourced from. So, you know, a bit like the pictures I've got up here on the screen, and a bit like that old photo of myself pre-iPhone, you know, in a very short space of time, a lot can happen, and that's what we're seeing. I was talking to Thea Speechley recently. Thea is the founder of an Australian company called Raw Assembly. They're an ethical and responsible sourcing material, fantastic for designers and any sort of brands that are wanting to move into this ethical space, which is where the market is going. And when we were speaking about fur, Thea said to me, look, at the end of the day, Melissa, the future of fur, it's not going to be about animal or synthetic. Instead, it's going to be made of natural, plant-based materials that become nutrients at the end of their product life cycle. And that's exciting because one of the other predictors of the growth in the fur industry was also recycled plastic. And, you know, Thea was saying, look, that doesn't come without problems. So really, it is also moving beyond, I mean, the recycling of plastic, yes, it's exciting, but it's also moving beyond that into new materials, some of which, and Jack Tufty again from Unreal Fur spoke of this, where he said, we're talking about materials that haven't even been invented yet, and that's very exciting. To give you an idea of some of the materials that Thea mentioned, we've got here this hemp-based fur. So that's a combination of hemp and tencel, and it's gorgeous. And then I've got a picture here up of denim fur, again gorgeous. And then there's another product that she spoke of called Wakoa, and it's a vegan wool that's made of hemp with coconut fibers. So these really exciting developments that are happening. And, you know, it's true to say that, you know, designers and brands will continue to push luxury in fashion, and fur will be central to that. But these new materials, they're also, as part of this, redefining what luxury means. So in terms of wrapping up, really, it really is in saying, going back to this conscious generation, they are going to demand more from brands. They want authenticity, they want transparency, and they want to know where their materials are coming from. And that ethical piece is going to be critical. They want brands, they want designers, and they themselves want to do better by our planet and the animals we share it with. Compassionate fashion, therefore, is going to be a growing issue. It will continue to be something that brands will need to consider. We know, based on that Four Paws report, that there is a very big gap. There's a lot of room for improvement in that space with what brands are doing and the transparency, and then what they're actually delivering. And then I suppose in wrapping up, my question to you really is, whether you're a brand, a designer, or a consumer, is that we are moving into this new world, and the ones that are able to connect are the ones that will survive, the ones that are able to show that they are including this concept of ethics and animal welfare into this mix as part of that sustainability discussion, will be the ones most likely to survive. So really, my question is, are you part of this new world? Thank you. I'm going to finish up with a quote, which I always love, which is, if you can be anything in this world, be kind. And I'm going to just pop up a couple of the sources that obviously are people I spoke to today. And if I can, just put me back onto a big screen. I'm going to do that now so I can wrap up and say thank you. That was great. I'm really looking forward to any questions that you might have for me in the panel. And thank you again.